Well, I'm going to talk about some similarities between the sacrifices of Isaac and Jesus. I actually did this last year when I came across this. I was reading in Genesis 22 about this God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And I started getting the similarities of what Jesus did leading up to his crucifixion. So let me kind of get through this. I'll try not to go too fast. So we're going to start with the fact that both of them were only sons. Isaac in Genesis 22, verse 1, we're told that God told Abraham, "Take your son, your one and only son." And that was repeated numerous times in this section and other parts of the Bible. Jesus, very familiar passage, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son." So both of them were only sons at this point. Both were loved by their fathers, and they were to be offered as sacrifices. Isaac, again back in Genesis 22, God says, "Take Isaac, the one whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering." With Jesus in Luke 3:21, God's voice from above, from heaven, after Jesus was baptized, says, "You are my beloved son." Both carried the wood they would be sacrificed on. This one really kind of struck me. In Genesis 22:6, we're told that, "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son." So at this point, Isaac, they've gone to the point where they're going to do a sacrifice. This is where Abraham and Isaac separate from the rest of the group. He puts the wood on Isaac's back, or on his shoulders. With Jesus in John 19:17, it states that, and he went out bearing his own cross. Interesting part, side note, again, another reason for studying all the Gospels. Some of you may realize this is the only section that mentions that Jesus carried his cross. The other three mention that Simon of Cyrene was compelled to carry the cross. So at that point, we know Jesus was carrying it. But John's the only one that comes out and says that Jesus was actually carrying his own cross. And that could have been the cross, the beam, or the cross itself. Historians still aren't really sure on that. Both obeyed their fathers and did not resist. With Isaac in Genesis 22, we're told that Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. At this point, Isaac's not a boy. He's a young man, okay, to be able to carry the wood. So he's not this weak little kid. He's a strong man. Abraham at this point is over 100 years old. Isaac could have easily resisted and ran away, but it says he allowed himself to be tied up and placed on the altar. So Isaac was showing obedience to his father and trust in what he was about to do. With Jesus, after praying in the garden, and Peter cut off one of the servant's ears, Jesus says, "Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so?" And Jesus mentions in other parts of the Gospels that he had to do the will of his Father. So again, Jesus shows he could have ended this whole thing, but he knew he had to do it out of obedience to his Father because he knew what had to be done. This one's going to be interesting. Both returned from the dead and to their father's sides. Now, I'm going to start with Jesus first. In Matthew 28:6, this is after Jesus' resurrection, the women go to the tomb, and there are angels there, and the one angel says, "He is not here, for he has risen, as he said." And then Acts 7:56 says that this is Stephen speaking, and he said, "Behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. So we know that Jesus came back from the dead, defeated death, and we know that he returned to his Father in heaven. Okay? Now Isaac, this is the interesting part. Isaac obviously physically wasn't killed. God stopped that right before Abraham was about to plunge the knife into his son's chest. God stopped it, said, okay, I know your faith is there, gave another animal for a sacrifice, a ram. But in Hebrews chapter 11:19, it says that Abraham considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So even though Isaac didn't die physically, he was at the verge of death if God wouldn't have stopped it. Okay, so we're told in Hebrews that figuratively he did die, okay, and he was returned to his father. So it's just this interesting thing that when you're studying both the Old and New Testament, you're going to start coming across some of these comparisons. And it's important why we should be studying both the Old and New Testament to be able to see these things. Yeah, I'm sure you've come across other things that maybe you came across as, hey, this sounds familiar from the Old Testament, or you're in the Old Testament, so this sounds familiar to something in the New Testament. When you start doing those, write those things down, because this isn't just, hey, this is nice. This is an important thing. God put these things in the Bible for us to be able to learn from and share with others. And these aren't just, like Mark Staten likes to say, he doesn't believe in coincidences. They're God instances, right? So when it comes to the Bible, yeah, there's no secret messages. There's no secret numbers telling when Christ is coming back. That's not in there. What you'll find is things like this that help us daily grow and understand God's Word. So, short and sweet, but I thought it was important to share with all of you because it just, again, emphasizes the importance of being in God's Word. So before we go to singing here, I just encourage you, if you're not in God's Word, try to be in there on a daily basis. There's ways of reading it and studying it, listening to it when you're at work, on the road, at your own home. I encourage you to be in it. If you're here and you're not sure how to study the Bible, come talk to us after the service. Plenty of men here that would be willing to sit down and talk with you and encourage you and help you to get yourself into a study of God's Word and to grow in that. Maybe you're here, maybe you've been studying with somebody and you understand what baptism is, and maybe at that point, like what happened this morning, the baptistry is always ready. All it takes is for you to make that decision, come up here, and we'll it's not about getting you wet. It's about the fact that getting you to the point of this is the obedience when it comes to salvation is baptism, and then helping you to grow from there. So as we come up to sing, I'll leave that with you. Thank you.